provide the infrastructure for people to get out and enjoy, whether it's just non-consumptive use of the forest, or whether it's just the fact that there's clean water that comes from the forest, that there's clean air that comes from the forest. So, as I look at that, that's our charge. And we've got some great successes. But again, the scale and pace, if you do the math on what we've done in the past, on what we need to do, it's pretty daunting. But you only get there if you work at it one area at a time. The states put more resources, the timber industry put more resources in it, the Forest Service has put significant resources and has a great commitment. And every time I'm with the undersecretary or the secretary, I thank them profusely for what they've done as far as shared stewardship. The NRCS is involved, the private lands. A lot of people on private lands, they want to manage their private lands. They obviously don't want their private lands to burn up if either state or federal land catches on fire next to it. But the collective will of society to have better managed forest lands is an absolute certainty. And so now you're tasked with the job of what barriers are there to doing that, to increase the scope and scale that's out there. And I know some of it's going to be money, but a lot of it is other things that we can do as far as getting that done. I've been from Boise to McCall a couple times this year, and then I've flown over multiple times. The work that we did last year on the Tussock Moth, there's a few areas we missed, and I know one of the priority areas that this group has is around the Sage End area. And because the road's closed, I have to look at it from the air as I go over. But some of the work that the state, that private landowners, that the state did last year on the Tussock Moth is a great example of how we need to more proactively and more rapidly implement more intensive management in areas under duress. Fortunately, this year, as I fly around the state, the bulk of the forest looked pretty darn healthy. We had some extraordinary rainfall at the right period of time. I think we've got one big fire in the Lowman Bear Valley area. That poor area, they're getting floods, they're getting earthquakes, and now they're getting fires. I don't know what God doesn't like about the Bear Valley area, but they're sure getting picked on right now. But for the most part, we're doing pretty well, which means the work that you all are doing is even more important. But we need to set an example. We're in the election season, we're 99 days out. This program is so important, regardless of what happens, whether it be in Congress or whether it be in the administration. We have to create the velocity and the success in this program. So regardless of what happens, it continues to move on. You have my commitment, the Department of Lands, the land boards, the state of Idaho's commitment, and now it's up to you collectively with the broad range of people you represent to continue to implement it. But once again, the scale and the scope is what we need to work on. So with that, Peg, I'll try and answer some questions.
Thank you, Governor, for that inspiration and your vision. Do we have people, members or guests that would like to engage with the Governor and have any specific questions for him? If so, let's have you unmute yourself and ask your question. Anybody?
Hey, this is Brian. I'll go ahead and start while others formulate questions. Governor, I know you've met with a number of Forest Service officials lately, I believe, Undersecretary Hubbard and others. Can you tell us a little bit more about those discussions, what they were interested in, and what you talked with them
Well, as I stated, the secretary and the undersecretary are very committed to the whole concept of shared stewardship, because a lot of the problems they see are those fringe issues where activity on one piece of real estate negatively has negative consequences for the adjacent ground. When there's a big fire, a big catastrophic fire in the West, particularly in the Intermountain West, really nobody cares about whose land it is on. All they care is they don't like the consequences of a big catastrophic fire. They don't like the consequences of jeopardizing anadromous fish habitat. They don't like the consequences. When there's a big fire going on, nobody calls up USDA and says, boy, you guys are doing a great job up there. And so anything we can do, and particularly we can show examples of where a managed piece of real estate, the intensity of the fire is different than it is in an unmanaged piece of ground. Every time we show one of those examples, we enhance our ability to continue to move that scale and scope. And I know that the USDA, the Forest Service, are all committed to increasing the scale and scope.
I'll keep going. You make a good point about the need to have demonstrable successes, metrics that this group and the state and the Forest Service can show to the public and prove to them that, this program is saving the places they love. In a perfect world, what might some of those, examples be that we can aim to achieve and show to the public that that'll demonstrate to them the importance of this project?
Well, I think the collective, this group is a great group because the collective will of this group to get things done, to increase the scope and scale, kind of knocks down some of the barriers. There's a significant effort by this administration to try and streamline NEPA, and the more collective agreement we have ahead of time on the scope and scale of these projects, basically helps the agencies, it helps the land managers, it helps the communities have more surety in the projects that they're going to do. And I think that's a big part of it, that if we do the right things early, to have better, healthy forests, it really is a win-win-win for everyone. And I think those are kind of the examples that we want to see. Everybody's frustrated, whether they be on the far conservation side or the old commodity side. Everybody's frustrated by the fact that there's a general agreement about a project and it can't get done. Nobody likes that, and that's kind of the charge of this group.
I'll stop there and open it up to others.
Yeah, good morning, Governor. This is Curtis Elke, State Conservationist with NRCS. And first, I'd like to just say thank you for your vision and your leadership in working with us, NRCS, and having the confidence that you have in USDA NRCS. We look very much forward to being a part of this team and utilizing our skills and my staff skills and resources available for the good of building our successes, and our partnerships here in Idaho is like none other that I've experienced across the landscape. So it's a pleasure to serve at this capacity, and thank you for allowing us to be a partner in the shared stewardship.
Well, I've been around for a long time, and I remember when we didn't have the consensus we have now, when it was either no logging or get out the cut, and the delta between the two sides was enormous. This group and the fundamental building blocks of good neighbor, forest health, and now shared stewardship are a lot of hard work by a lot of people, a lot of science, has gone into it. And, you know, your folks generally represent the private landowners, and they need to be aware, and most of them are, that wildlife habitat, fire, watershed, all those things don't follow a section line or a quarter section line. And that's what we got to continue. That's a big part of shared stewardship. And then we share resources. That the planning of a whether it be a watershed project, whether it be reducing sediment coming off of a road, all those projects, the better they're coordinated across all the landowners as per the charge of shared stewardship, the more efficient they are, instead of everybody having to work in their own silo and have that friction cost between silos.
Governor, this is Dustin here. One of the things I want to go back to, and just really a comment, is the statement about the insect and disease issues we've had here on predominantly our Packer John State Forest, as well as the Boise National Forest. And I will say that, you know, we're coming together in the spirit of partnership to get things done on the ground. It's really, as you've said, the Idaho way. It's how we operate. It's how we accomplish these big things on the landscape. And I will say that I'm very impressed with the work that's been done on these southern Idaho forests, in particular with the Boise National Forest and their work on trying to catch up with our pace on addressing the tussock moth issues on these forests. You touched on the closure there at Sagehen. Certainly it's unfortunate, but it's a necessary thing because leadership there at both the forest and the district level are really getting things done there. And in the spirit of partnership, I think that collaboration and that cross-boundary work there on tackling this one issue alone is really a testament to what we're trying to get done here, and to scale that up, keep the momentum going. The tussock moth issue was a challenge. It was unfortunate to see that happen, but it served as a big opportunity for us to really get things done across the landscape on these forests down here. So I really appreciate that partnership with the Boise National Forest.
Well, we've been pretty fortunate the last few years in our winter and spring precipitation. But you know, droughts, fires, bugs, you know, rain and snow is a great healer of many, many things in the resource area. Having a good precipitation year, whether it's the snow staying on longer, more snow, or those timely rains like we had this late spring and early summer, really help our ecosystems have the resilience they need. But that's not always the case. We have to charge ahead in our planning based on what the scientists, what the climatologists tell us is going to happen. And if that means we want to change the makeup of our forests about species, subspecies, mix, density, there's general agreement there. The issue is we got to get it done, whether it's non-commercial, pre-commercial cuts, whether it be commercial cutting, whether it be fire, you know, doing fires in either the spring, controlled burns in either the spring or fall is always going to be a challenge. In the spring, everybody worries that it'll go, we won't have it totally contained, and then it gets into summer fire season. In the fall, nobody wants to shut down big areas because particularly the hunters that are out there. So the collective will of this group in making those managements. There's some areas, fire is really the only tool that we can use, but we know more about pre-commercial cutting, commercial cutting, all those things will make things better. But I think with the tussock moth deal, the end of this year, we ought to really look and see what's happened and kind of what we did right from a timing standpoint, what we didn't do right. But as I fly back and forth the length of the state and look out, I tell you what, it looks a heck of a lot better than it did about 10 months ago.
And Governor, with that, I'm being told that you have your next appointment coming up, and we really appreciate you joining us. We'll be in here working until noon if you feel like coming back in and listening to some of the discussion.
Okay, well, thank you all for everything you've done and everything you're gonna do. Scale and scope, scale and scope.
Great. Thank you, Governor. Thank you, Brian. Make sure. Okay, let's transition to our next section now. That was a good kickoff for us. You know, we haven't met all together for 8 months, but the committee leaders have been moving out with their individual committees to start to advance the thinking around the things that we said we were going to do in our charter. Next up, we're going to hear from the 4 committee leaders, a very crisp overview of what the committees have been up to. The committees are the Principals Committee, and we have Tim Garcia going to talk about that for a few minutes. Then Tom Schultz will talk about opportunities. John Robeson will talk about the metrics or performance indicators. And then Craig Foss will talk about our communications strategy together. So each speaker is going to speak for a very short time, about 8 minutes each, and then we'll have 10 minutes at the end for clarity and Q&A. So with that, Tim Garcia, why don't you go ahead and unmute yourself, and let's begin with our principles.
Great, thanks, Peg. Can you hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
All right. It's good to see everyone, even if it's on a screen. Hope everyone's doing well. Back in December, I volunteered to lead the Principals Committee, and the intention of developing principles was to assure that the Shared Stewardship Advisory Group met the intent of what Governor Little so eloquently described in his opening remarks, and that we developed principles in a way that were concise and simple and captured the intent, again, of the governor, as well as the participants in the Shared Stewardship Advisory Group. And so with that, I started by pulling together all of the mission statements from the agencies involved, from the mission statement of the IFRP, of the National Association of State Foresters, who developed principles, as well as a consortium of conservation groups at the national level that provided shared stewardship working principles to the Undersecretary as we were rolling out shared stewardship. And so, these principles are common to, and many in that exercise, many of the principles that we shared along with our agency mission statements aligned very, very well. But it really came down to assuring that we were able to anchor to the shared stewardship agreement that that the state of Idaho and the Forest Service signed back in December of 2018, and it was tied to those resource values that Idaho citizens really count on. It's clean water, it's fiber, it's economy, it's abundant fish and wildlife habitat. And so the background and sort of preamble of the principles lays out the existing condition, where we're at in terms of the tools that we have available to us, and how we can convene together as willing participants and willing land managers and landowners to assure that we're working on the right acres to reduce the threat of the catastrophic wildfires that Governor Little mentioned, to improve the conditions of the forest, to provide clean water and wildlife habitat. And so I wanted to really scroll down to the 8 principles and walk through those. Hopefully you all were able to make this quick read of the background and purpose, but really spend my remaining 4 minutes on the 8 principles and walk through those so that you understood, again, the connection to the shared stewardship agreement and the tie to both agency missions as well as principles that were identified by, again, IFRP, the National Association of State Foresters, as well as the conservation groups. And the first one really is to identify strategic forest restoration projects. And the reason we chose that word strategic, because we simply don't have the resources to conduct forest restoration at an appropriate scale across all of forested acres in Idaho. So we really need to zero in on those highest priority acres to assure that we're protecting the resource values that I mentioned, economy, habitat, water. The second principle is that we acknowledge that the active management is needed in some acres in order to accomplish that restoration. And that's acknowledging that there's other tools in the toolbox that we're gonna completely optimize. Everything from prescribed fire, wise use of wildland fire, active management, and thinning around communities where there may not be a commercial component to assure that we're meeting those values. The third principle really is anchored to the fact that we've got a vibrant forest industry that's tied to the economic health of particularly rural communities, and that we acknowledge that that is really a hub to assuring that we can, they have the tools available and can derive value out of some of the products that are coming off of these as a result of the forest restoration work that we'll be doing. The fourth principle is acknowledging the value of collaboration between citizens, all of our interest groups, elected officials, and land managers. It's really important that that we, in acknowledging Governor Little's comment about the convergence of folks who are really interested in forest restoration and how we do that, we gain value out of assuring that we do this in a transparent and collaborative way. The fifth element is acknowledging the value of science and making sure that we use every tool that we can to optimize those treatments and to assure that that we're sustaining those jobs. And then the sixth priority is really using the resources in a wise way to assure that we're targeting our limited resources on those highest priority areas. And there are priority areas across the state, whether they fall within the formal priority areas that we'll hear a little bit later from Jeff and Lynn on. There are priority areas across every forested acre or every national forest in Idaho. We need to be wise about assuring that we deploy those resources in a way that that we can optimize the treatments. Near completion is the value of monitoring and assuring that when we implement a project, we go back and monitor and assure that that we've met the intent of the treatment, that we learn from the outcomes of the implementation, and that we were able to apply those any change conditions or any outcomes that we've learned to further subsequent treatments. And there's real value in assuring that we have a good monitoring component to our work. And then finally, again, it's really to reiterate a little bit tied to the collaboration, but we really have come a long way in developing these partnerships, not just the Forest Service and IDL, but the partnerships with IFRP, the partnerships with other state and federal agencies. And that's how we'll be successful, is to assure that we retain the level of trust that we've built over the last year. So that's a summary of the principles, of the draft principles. I'd hope that we could adopt these principles by the end of today. If you have comments or thoughts on strengthening these, I really want to send my thanks to Peg, because she really put a fine point on some of the language that the subcommittee provided. But really like to land on adoption of these principles so that we can understand the framework that that will advance the governor's intention around shared stewardship. And with that, I'll pause and pass to the next subcommittee.
Thank you, Tim. Did Tom Schultz join us to talk about the opportunities? At one point, we were calling this the Barriers Committee, but of course, with Tom's energy, we switched it up to the Opportunities Committee, and they've been had one meeting in early March. Tom may not be with us just yet, and so what we'll do is give him a little more time, unless Tara, you're going to pick that up for him.
No, I've been monitoring my email just to make sure he didn't send anything over, but he did send a text that he'd be on in about 5 to 10 minutes. So I think he's ready to give that report himself.
Very good, thank you. We'll move on. John Robeson joined us from Idaho Conservation League, and he's representing the metrics Key Performance Indicators Committee. So John, go ahead, and if you'd like to share your screen, go ahead and do that. I'll give you the screen share ability.
Great, fantastic. Let's try this. All right, and let's see. Are folks, I'm not sure what screen, are folks seeing this discussion document? Is that accurate?
It's on.
Okay. So thanks again for the opportunity. We've had my committee met last week and also earlier this spring to talk about key performance indicators. And it comes down to two basic things in that our overarching goals that we really don't want to lose sight of are doubling the annual acres treated through active management on national forests and reducing fuels and wildfire risk to communities and promoting cross-boundary work on other lands and priority landscapes. And so what I wanted to talk about was we've got these two goals, but there's also some additional instruction in terms of how we meet those goals. And so, and the importance of putting these key performance indicators out there is that we want to go ahead and track progress toward these goals, allow strategies to be adjusted as needed, and then also hold agencies and ourselves accountable for abiding by the terms of the agreement. And so, so again, we've got two major goals and then a couple areas of how to get them. So the first thing I wanted to talk about was doubling the annual acres treated. That's pretty basic there in terms of some metrics to start with. But also we want to pay attention about are we actually, is the work that we're doing on the landscape, is it being effective? And so are we doing what we said we're going to do? And then is it actually having the intended result? So in terms of metrics there, you've got potential changes in fire regime condition class of these acres, changes in the prevalence of insect and diseases, and there's regular data sources, so we don't have to recreate the wheel on any of these in terms of the forest health highlights that's conducted by the Idaho Department of Lands and the Forest Service. Regarding reducing fuels and wildfire risk communities, we want to make sure that we're treating the right areas in the right places. So that means acres treated within, are they overlapping with the high fire risk areas mapped and already identified in the State Forest Action Plan, and also coordinated with the community wildfire protection plans. There's another metric to take a look at too, and that is you don't have to actively treat every acre to protect a larger acre. So we can look at the acres treated and then the acres protected if we're strategic in that. And the Rocky Mountain Research Station has a Firewise program that can help us look at that. One other component for reducing risk is how involved are the communities in these hazardous fuels reductions. So in terms of participants in the Firewise program, number of applicants for fuel treatment, value of grants. And again, that information is should be readily available. Now, in terms of how we're going to accomplish these goals, we want to look at producing additional fiber, creating and sustaining jobs. So we've got metrics related to timber volume, board feet, number of mills, mill capacity, job retention, both local and total, and then workers and volunteers available for contracted service activities. And so this is the scope of issues. It's not just about getting the cutout. We're talking about reforestation following wildfires. We're talking about road improvements to improve watershed conditions. We're talking about fish passage, potentially wildlife. And so there's a number of entities that do annual reports from the Idaho Forest Products Commission, the Policy Analysis Group, University of Montana, that readily collect this information. The other metric that we're looking at is, are we actually collaborating? Is the left hand talking to the right hand? How much coordination and shared decision space is there among state and federal agencies and stakeholders? So one of the things to talk about that is the use of existing authorities and partnerships. And so are we using good neighbor authority to the extent we should? Are we using the widened authority joint chiefs review? Are we staffing these positions? And I'm happy to say that we seem to be. And then basically, is there gas in the tank? Do we actually have CFLR funding for these projects? And right now, I think that that seems to be coming together, and there are regular data sources for that. The other thing I want to talk about was looking at the some of the maintaining forest and watershed health and resiliency. So these are the guardrails or sideboards for these projects. And ideally you want to maintain them, but and not have them degrade, but ideally we'd actually enhance them. And so that's what good forest management does. So water quality and watershed conditions are maintained and improved and more resilient, the same with wildlife habitat. And so one thing with that is the Idaho Department of Environmental Quality, they have their regional surface water managers, and they have a number of sampling points they've monitored for years that are in watersheds of mixed ownership. And if we are doing our job in terms of on the state, the private, the Forest Service, and all working together, at those water collection sampling points for sediment or temperature, we should see those either maintain or improve. And those are going to be depending on the project orientation and the like. That's another component we can look at. There's one thing I wanted to mention too, and this is one that I'm going to queue up Paul Orbuck to talk a little bit about this just in a minute or two. But one of the things that a bullet point that I need to add back in, and that's just one of the ways to measure coordination and stakeholder involvement is through a survey. You have to ask people what they think and ask them, are they feeling engaged? Is the Forest Service and the Department of Lands, are they actually making more concerted efforts to work with communities? And so that could involve a stakeholder survey to find out, are folks reaching out to you? Are they paying attention? Are they listening? Is there a dialogue going back and forth? And so there's that, the Idaho Forest Restoration Partnership is for a number of other projects, but also this relates well with this, is thinking of, is there a way to survey participants in the collaboratives and get a baseline information of how well the Forest Service is doing at this. And so anyway, we've got just 1 minute left. I don't know if Paul, you wanted to, if you're available to hop on and just describe that we're drafting up a survey just to get a sense of how we're doing.
I'm here, John. Thanks.
Yep.
Great recap of your work so far, and that's a lot of work. The Washington office of the Forest Service is at the same time as Idaho's developing shared stewardship measure. They're thinking, how do we measure nationally? And they came to Idaho Department of Lands and Idaho Conservation League. We've had a number of calls, and they said, help us do a pilot, and can we do it in Idaho to see if a survey will help us measure collaboration, coordination, partnership. those kind of warm and fuzzy things. So we're trying one. And Idaho Forest Restoration Partnership has done a number of these in the past. So John volunteered them, and it's a pilot survey. It talks about how is the Forest Service doing. It talks about how IDL is doing, and then there's some more generic questions about, do you think, is this a good way to go? This partnership, this collaboration across boundary efforts. Give us a 1 to 5 score. So at the end of the day, we'll have a sense of, can we do this nationally? Should we do it by forest? Should we do it by state? We're just trying to get some information on what a survey can help us learn. And thanks to John and Peg and the Forest Service for putting in some work on a few calls to set something up. And the survey should be going out in the next month or so. Isn't that right, John? And it's a pilot. No one's name is on it. It's a pilot. We're just trying to learn. And Idaho, we thought, would be a good place to try it out.
That's right. And I'm happy to talk to other folks. My time is up, but please take a look, and happy to make other edits and suggestions as we go along.
Great. Thank you, John. That was a really crisp overview, and the committee has been working robustly to get us to this point, to get us to those precious few indicators of our performance and what we're holding ourselves accountable for. So next up, we're going to hear from Craig Foss, the work of the Communications Committee.
Thanks, Peg. Can you share the communications plan?
I can get it.
All right.
Go ahead.
So what we've done is worked with IDL's public information officer and the public affairs staff from regions 1 and 4 to draft the statewide shared stewardship interagency communications plan. The plan, just walking through sections of the plan overall, the first section really addresses the forest health and the landscape concerns. It's kind of the big picture, the why what's the issue, why there's a problem and why we're doing this. And so, there's about 5 bullets there addressing this. It gets at the 6.1 million acres of NFS lands that are at high risk of forest health and wildfire, and the high percentage of endowment lands that are touching those Forest Service lands, and the importance of us working together as agencies and private entities to impact the landscape. The next section goes into the overall shared stewardship objectives, and this gets at some of those key points like doubling the number of acres treated on NFS lands by 2025, and focusing those treatments on those highest priority 6.1 million acres. Then the plan goes into the communications objectives, and overall build shared stewardship program and project awareness among diverse and defined audiences. Working to secure key stakeholder support and input through the appropriate channels. This just really, what are the objectives of this communications plan? What should always be on our radar as we're moving forward with the plan? Then on page 2, it moves through the key messages for the plan. Something we talked about when we met previously is, how should we be thinking about this? How should we be talking about this as members of the Shared Stewardship Advisory Group? And so, in a sense, these key messages, this kind of becomes the elevator speech for us as members of the advisory group. When we're at meetings, when we're interacting with folks and we're talking about shared stewardship, what are some of the key messages that we should be conveying? And that's this series of bullets. That's the intent of this. So we're evidently not able to share the document. So this was sent out to everyone in advance, and hopefully you have it. But I think this is, for us as members, a really important part of this document, so that people are hearing consistent messaging around shared stewardship in Idaho. The next section goes into the channels of communication available. What are the mediums that we're going to use? And it just outlines, various, a lot of it'll be written. There'll be news releases and guest opinions that come from the different agencies around shared stewardship. Looking for opportunities, and everything that we're emphasizing here is free. We're not at this point planning to pay for advertising for shared stewardship. So looking for media opportunities such as TV, radio, and phone in or Zoom interviews to increase exposure to shared stewardship. Online, doing an awful lot online. I know that we now have 2 public information officers within our agency. One of those is really their expertise is social media, and so we're really working to ramp up that part of our information sharing. And we do have a shared stewardship website. Department of Lands Forest Service also has a website. We're working to be connecting our information. So that everybody's seeing the same thing and hearing similar messages. And if your agencies or the interests you represent are interested in posting information, this is an opportunity for us to be sure we're putting out consistent messaging. And then social media accounts are really becoming effective in reaching a wider range of audiences. And then, we'll also do radio and TV ads. Again, anything that's going to require us to pay for, we're likely to use in a limited capacity. But where we can and where we see opportunities and we can do those things in-house, we'll do that. Print, we want to do periodic fact sheets and frequently asked questions and brochures, things that we can post and make available for you folks and for the public. One of the items that was developed recently is a one-page, it's the Idaho Shared Stewardship fact sheet for northern and southern priority landscapes. And the whole idea behind this was, what's going on right now today, and what does this really look like? And so Charla, our public information officer, worked with the Forest Service and put together. It's just a real simple one-pager, and it gives folks a really good snapshot. I think it takes those the 2 north and south 2 million acre landscapes and boils it down to what are the focal areas within that? Where specifically are we targeting, and how many acres are we looking at for different types of treatment, mechanical, wildfire, those types of things. So, and the idea is that those one-pagers will probably be updated maybe a couple times a year, so that we have fairly recent information available with regard to what's going on. We're also looking at doing site tours, trying to get people out on the landscape and the media and publics, so that they can see what this really looks like on the ground. And then, finally, direct engagement. We're all involved with different groups, and it's important that we, whenever possible, have an opportunity to get out and speak directly to these groups about what's going on. We're certainly available, our folks, to do that. I know Peg has done a lot of that. I know that Lynn and Jeff are certainly available. I know Ara's done a lot of that with her folks as well. So, but what we've done is we've listed some of these key groups that we know that we need to be working with. But we also want your input. And if we've missed groups here, if there's folks that need to be on this list, or groups or organizations, membership organizations, please let us know. Send this information to Peg or myself, and we'll update this. Our goal is to have this finalized here in the next month. So with that, I don't have anything else, but thanks, Peg.
Thank you, Craig. And Just so you know that we're recording this meeting, and as we record, because we wanted to capture our thinking and share with others, we're having technical difficulties with some of the screen share. So what I'd like the next speakers to do is do your own screen share like John did. And here comes Tom, just in the nick of time. He's just joining the meeting. So welcome, Tom. You're up. Good morning, Tom. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning. Apologize for my tardiness.
No worries. As it turns out, we've already gone through the opening remarks, and we've gone through the other committee leaders' report outs. And if you're ready to begin, you can talk about the Opportunities Committee. And if you'd like to screen share your document, you can do that as well, or just talk through it. And
I'll probably just talk through it. Thanks, Peg.
Yeah, go ahead.
Good morning, everyone. So our committee was to look at different opportunities and or barriers that could help or hinder shared stewardship. We did have a meeting in April, and we came up with, we had speakers come in. We talked about basically looking at opportunities with Blue Forest Conservation. We looked at talking with the Wild Turkey Federation. We had a discussion on the use of LiDAR to help increase our understanding of both the private, state, and federal lands in the area and how that information could be helpful in understanding forest conditions. We also talked with NRCS in terms of their forestry program. So we had speakers present on those different topics. I think in my mind, probably the greatest utility for opportunities that exist is probably this Blue Forest Conservation. They have something called a Forest Resilience Bond, and they've utilized this in California and Colorado. So it's where you have restoration work on federal lands that cannot pay for itself, and there's insufficient funding, and they've worked to identify beneficiaries, and in many cases, the beneficiaries were watershed groups. So they looked at like the city of Denver as a potential watershed group. In California, they identified some of the insurance companies. They also identified some watershed groups. And so the way the project works is they actually secure an investment from outside investors. And then they set up the project, and they partner with someone like the National Forest Foundation or the Wild Turkey Federation to actually run the restoration projects. And then the beneficiaries of the project, which could be a municipality, it could be, like I said, a water authority, then those entities that are deemed to be beneficiaries, let's say you're protecting a watershed from a fire hazard, those beneficiaries pay some of the cost of that restoration work. And what is paid into that is then reimbursed to the investors in the project. And I think the investors typically are guaranteed a rate of return of somewhere between 3% and 4%. So we've had discussions with them. I've had some other discussions with Zach on that, but I do think where we have projects that may not have sufficient funding to pay for themselves, to pay their own way, and there is an opportunity to partner with someone like Blue Forest and Turkey Federation and the National Forest Foundation to get projects done. The LiDAR information that we discussed with Northwest Management, they did a nice job of kind of summarizing information. IDL last year did a flight over much of Idaho, and I think the total flight included almost 2 million acres of state, federal, and industrial lands. We talked about the opportunity within our shared stewardship areas to collect LiDAR information for potentially for private landowners, and or analyze the Forest Service data that's already been collected. They have some prior data that has already been acquired, looking at it as well as the new data. Much of the new data, at least on the federal lands and probably on some of the private lands, has not been analyzed yet. And so Northwest Management has tools to facilitate the analysis that could be done, and that analysis could then help characterize those priority landscapes and give us a better sense of forest conditions, volume, stems per acre. All of that information could be available if that's something that we had funding to help facilitate that. And so that was a presentation that we did. NRCS, like I said, I see Curtis on the call here. has also done a nice job of coordinating across the state. I know they've had meetings with IDL in terms of funding that they could help provide for shared stewardship, but also looking at how we could potentially expand. They have a position in Moscow. I know that position has responsibilities up north, but I think there's also potential, maybe could we get another forester, even in Coeur d'Alene within, maybe have somebody dedicated for the south and somebody dedicated for the north. And I think, Curtis, you've probably hired your statewide position by now as well, your forest coordinator. But I think those are some things that we talked about and those opportunities that exist. I think the biggest limitations that we probably identified probably have to do with funding and staffing. I know there's been turnover. I know Peg will be leaving before too long, at least she says that. So I think keeping the staffing positions filled, and I know the Forest Service has hired a position in the north and the south, but getting Peg's position refilled. And also looking at just other funding opportunities. It sounds like the department's budget looks pretty good going into the session. I know there's going to be some holdbacks across state government, but I think just having an eye for what funding is available, both at the state level as well as outside, whether it's federal funding or even cooperator funding that could be utilized. So that's, in a nutshell, that's what our group kind of talked about. And like I said, I think the greatest opportunity is probably with Blue Forest Conservation, working with NRCS, NWTF, and the National Forest Foundation to explore other funding opportunities for projects that may not pay themselves their way out of the forest. So I guess that's a summary of kind of what we've done and what we've looked at. I guess I'm open for any questions.
Thanks, Tom. Before we take questions from you, Craig's going to give a very quick update on some of the topics you brought up, and then we have about 8 to 10 minutes for general conversation around the committee work that's been done, or ask clarifying questions. So Craig's going to give a very quick update.
You bet. Hey, Peg, maybe one other thing I was going to mention real quick too. I'm not sure if Leanne's on this call or not, but we've also been engaging pretty actively with the Montana DNRC folks. They're working on their Forest Action Plan right now. They have a Forest Action Advisory Committee. And we've been having a lot of discussions about cross-boundary work between Idaho and Montana within that group. And I think there's an opportunity. That's one of the things that we talked about. I know early on there was a discussion of a project that could be an I-90 project that would maybe go from Coeur d'Alene to Missoula. And I think there's definitely interest on the Montana side. So that would be coordinating between the Panhandle and the Lolo, and partners, between IDL and DNRC. But I think there are opportunities as we talk about cross-boundary work, not just within the state, but also across state boundaries, whether it's analysis or whether it's utilizing shared resources to do that. But I know there is interest in Montana and looking at how we work across the state border to get projects done. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Tom. Craig's going to give a quick update on some of those topics and then general questions.
I just Tom hit on staffing, and I wanted to give everybody an update with regard to where we're at with staffing for shared stewardship in Idaho. As Tom indicated, Peg's been trying to retire for a couple of years now, and we have committed to her that we are truly we're gonna do everything we can to support her in that. And we re-advertised the statewide shared stewardship coordinator position, which is really the position that Peg has been serving in. That closed yesterday. We advertised the position location for being either Coeur d'Alene or Boise, and we had an excellent response this time around. And so we're very optimistic. I expect we'll be doing interviews in mid-August, and with hopes of having somebody on hopefully by the end of the month, first week of September. So that's the statewide coordinator. We have a north and a south landscape coordinator. We have those positions on board, and we're going to be hearing from them next. That's Jeff Lau, the North Idaho Shared Stewardship landscape coordinator, and then Lynn Oliver, who's the South Idaho landscape coordinator. Jeff and Lynn are both Forest Service employees. They are located within our IDL offices, Jeff in Coeur d'Alene and Lynn down in Boise at our headquarters office. And that's through a shared agreement with the Forest Service. We have 2 forester positions that we will be advertising in August. and one forester position for the North Idaho landscape and one for the South Idaho landscape. Those are intended to be kind of shared good neighbor and shared stewardship foresters. Our legislature appropriated some funding and gave us the authority for those to hire those positions last session. So we have general fund money, but we're also working on a partnership with NRCS, and thanks to Curtis reaching out and expressing a desire to be part of helping fund this initiative. We're looking at a shared cost for those positions between IDL and NRCS. Curtis is also helping and fund our statewide coordinator positions. So that'll be shared between Forest Service, IDL, NRCS, and then also using some other funds that we have available. So that's what we're looking at staffing wise, and that's the timing that we're looking at for these different positions.
Thanks, Craig. Great update on staffing and capacity. It takes people to make all this work, of course. So we have about 10 minutes, 8 to 10 minutes for general questions for the committee leaders. Any dialogue or questions or comments, please unmute yourself and bring it forward. What did you hear that intrigued you or that needs more clarification?
Yeah, this is Curtis. Just I guess to provide Tom with an update and everyone else with an update that we have in fact hired our state forester here at NRCS, and the charge of the instructions that have been given to Chris Town is his name, and he's located up in Moscow, an excellent skilled employee that we are very hopeful to see some very good things come from him. But also he's been instructed to work across boundaries as well, private land, public land, and whatever it takes to make our forests here in Idaho the very best. Although we primarily work with private land, we as an agency look for opportunities and how we can work across private land boundaries as well. They affect each other most certainly. And I just want to thank Craig and Peg and everyone else too in the like Craig mentioned, NRCS has submitted a grant proposal up to our grants and agreements team with some really good deliverables and expectations for these positions. But we're just glad to have this opportunity again to be a part of this, and any way that NRCS can assist, we're here at the table willing to help in any way we can.
Great. Thanks, Curtis. It's been great and a pleasure to work with you and your people on the ground. And we're going to hear more about that cross-boundary work in our next presentations. Anyone else has comment or thoughts about these committees and the work that you've heard about?
Hey, this is Brian Wunderlich. Thank you to each of the leaders, the committee leaders. Those were great presentations. And I think my follow-up is for the metrics committee. Very impressive work that they've done putting all that together. One thing I picked up on in the governor's comments is the continuity of this initiative and its ability to keep its momentum going regardless of what may or may not happen in national politics. And so I think that the question there is how do we measure that? How do we properly focus the group in terms of having that ability to continue on, that all sides recognize the value of this work regardless of the outcome in November.
Brian, this is John. I really appreciate that. One of the, and again, there's a million metrics you can look at, and I have a little list at the bottom of some that didn't make it to the top list. But one of the ones in there, the last one on the bottom of sentence of page 2, or the bottom of page 2 is the continuation of policies that support cross-boundary and collaboration work. So are the policies, that support this work and the collaborative support for it, do those persist over time? And, whatever, happens and various pendulums back and forth, do those core values hold? And I think that's another one in terms of, are folks still on board? And the governor also talked about kind of the Idaho way. And that's kind of the way we do it. If it works for the local communities while recognizing the national significance of these landscapes, those solutions tend to endure, and those are the ones that make a difference over time. So I think that's right on to really highlight, do we have the momentum and the diversity here to withstand any types of various swings of the pendulum back and forth.
Yeah, and I encourage your group to consider, ways to measure that. I mean, this is probably oversimplified, but something that jumps out at me is to have at least 2 meetings with federal officials on this initiative, and potentially that could be one elected Democrat that's influential in this area and one elected Republican. Those type of things that preserve this program and make sure that it doesn't become a partisan thing, that it's clearly something that everybody can agree on and support, regardless of all the other turbulence going on in the political world right now.
Great point. I think that's something we could talk about. And also, as we're doing that, I think that's a good opportunity to bring the other, highlight the work of the other committees as well, and saying, hey, here's our metrics, and here's our principles, here's our communications, and then here is our kind of work going ahead for the opportunities and how they last longer than they overlap any one watershed or fireshed, and also the same thing in terms of the election cycle. These are core issues to Idahoans, and we want the long-term results on the land.
Very good. We in our founding documents, in the agreement, we talked about Idaho's culture and being bold and having strong leadership. I think we're demonstrating that through the work of our committees as we forge ahead. Are there any other thoughts, comments directed at the committee leaders? You'll have another shot at them later this afternoon when we try to bring this all together in the final conversation. So be thinking about that. Last chance before we take a little break. Oh, go ahead, Cheryl. I see you.
Yeah, just with the metrics committee, I think that, what we found as we were trying to establish the baseline on the national forests is that while there are a lot of databases, the challenge is going to be finding the right ones to tell the right story. So what I loved about your metrics was that it's more holistic, and we do have some great databases that can help with some of those, and I'll mention a few when Chuck and I are talking. But I think that's going to be a place to really stay connected so that we can utilize those national databases. It's one thing with the Secretary Perdue, he's really data driven. So he's been driving data, and we'll go over a couple of cool data stats I mined from that really do demonstrate that Idaho is out in front and really hitting on a lot of cylinders. So anyway, it's just a place that I think that we should stay really connected with the more data nerds in our organization, and then maybe it might be helpful for you guys to get like a little drive-by of our executive dashboards, because then you can see that real-time info and go, oh, this is the kind of stuff that we want to connect into. So.
Great, thanks, Cheryl. And of course, the state has wall-to-wall reports on water quality, stream conditions, and all sorts of things. So we're going to be merging the data sets from all these existing sources so that we have a complete picture. Thank you. Anyone else? If not, we're going to be taking a 5-minute break here pretty quick. Not seeing any hands, and I'm not hearing from anyone. All right, very good. Thanks, committee leaders. Excellent. There has been a lot of work going on even during COVID, and hopefully the members saw that today. So let's go ahead and take a 5-minute break. We'll resume at 9:25. Thanks. 9:25 Pacific.
And don't disconnect, just stay connected, but make sure you mute, and see you in 5 minutes.
Yep. Welcome back, everyone. It's time to begin our next section. You've heard from the committee leaders and the governor. Next, we're going to really get you down to what's happening at the local level with these priority landscapes in Idaho. As Craig said, we have them staffed now. We have leadership and coordination to work across boundaries. So first, you're going to hear from our newest landscape coordinator, Lynn Oliver, again, a Forest Service employee embedded with the Idaho Department of Lands in Boise to serve that coordination role. First, we'll hear about the South Idaho landscape, and then we'll transition over to Jeff Lau for the North Idaho landscape. And then we'll have time for clarifying questions. All right, thanks again. Everyone's muted but Lynn Oliver. And Lynn, go ahead and share your screen.
All right, Peg, can you hear me?
Yes, you're good.
Okay. You can see my slide?
Yes.
Okay. 1 second. Peg, are you getting that feedback?
Yes, I'm getting feedback, but it's not horrible.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So welcome. My name is Lynn Oliver, and thank you for being here. First, I'd like to give a quick overview of the two priority landscapes. The north and south priority landscapes are 2 and 2.3 million acres in size, respectively. The areas were selected by using the 2020 Idaho Forest Action Plan and completing a risk assessment to identify the higher risk areas to begin focusing our efforts. I couldn't turn off your volume. Oops. Hold on 1 second. Okay, so we selected our two landscapes by identifying the highest risk areas, and we begun focusing our efforts there. By focusing on these two landscapes and concentrating on where our resources, the goal is to build the methods and the tools to help expand shared stewardship across the state. So the southern priority area includes the Payette National Forest, the northwest part of the Boise National Forest. Idaho Department of Lands offices include the Payette Lake Supervisory Area and the Southwest Supervisory Area down in Boise. Other agencies within the landscape include the Bureau of Land Management, Bureau of Reclamation, and private land, which is 35% of the landscape. So we kicked this off in December 2019. Working together, we identified two focal areas to really concentrate our initial work. We had a slight pause because of COVID, and in this June, we really kicked it off and started it out with an meeting with multiple agencies. That was the boots on the ground meeting. We had roughly 60 representatives from a cross section of agencies within the landscape. We introduced the vision of shared stewardship, and we provided then some local and regional examples of cross-boundary collaboration. Some of the outcomes, in the afternoon, we had breakout groups, but we focused on our Granite Meadows and Highway 95 corridor, a project on the Payette National Forest. In the south, we focused on the Cascade Reservoir. We identified opportunities to pursue with homeowners at the Tamarack Resort. And in the Sage-Hen and High Valley area, part of the Southern Folklore area, we discussed various ways to engage the private landowners through each of our agencies. Finally, our fuel staff spent some time discussing how to be successful using the Wyden Authority and other methods for activities on private land. So all in all, it was a helpful meeting. Currently, what we have in progress, the map you're seeing on the right, you're seeing lots of projects within this priority landscape. This projects include active operations right now, planned operations that are completed, and projects that are planning and that are in progress, and some of our out-year planning. Some of the projects I mentioned, Granite Meadows, #1 up on the top of the slide, Sage-Hen, #2 at the bottom. But more also very important is some of the work done by Idaho Department of Lands through Valley County. They're actively working on addressing acreages on private land. Current accomplishments. As the governor mentioned, agency alignment is critical, and the Boise and the Payette and the local Idaho Department of Land staff down here have been spending substantial amounts of times with addressing the Douglas fir tussock moth outbreak. It's had a heavy impact to the private state and federal forest lands, and the Forest Service and the Idaho Department of Lands has made sure that we're in alignment to prioritize the treatments. And within our 3 different units, the Boise, the Payette, and IDL, we have almost 50 million board feet of treatments that have been that are scheduled to be completed. And we're roughly 60% of the way there since this activity started late last year. Also, the private forestry staff within Idaho Department of Lands has been contributing to this effort, and they've been working directly with the largest private landowner in the landscape, which is DF Development. And they've been providing harvest recommendations, and DF Development has several salvage sales that are also occurring. So we're starting to expand the partnership to not just the agencies, but to the private side. So some of our other current accomplishments, based on what came out of our boots on the ground meeting, IDL has awarded Valley County $75,000 to pursue hazardous fuel treatments at the Tamarack Resort. I was out on the ground there yesterday with their contractor, and there's lots of opportunities to do work there. They're excited to participate. And finally, the Boise and the Payette have made a joint CFLRP submission, and our project was recommended for funding in 2021 if there's applicable appropriations available. Finally, just to highlight one of the projects we'll be talking about in the months to come, and that's the Granite Meadows project. The Payette Forest began developing this project in 2018 and 19 to include cross-boundary opportunities at the initial formulation of this project. So the project is currently designated, includes about 16,000 acres of private land, and that's the black hatch that you're seeing here, and the ski resort. And also in purple is the Idaho Department of Lands, shown over here. So that's 16,000 acres. By using this opportunity with the NEPA, we'll evaluate whether we use the use of the Wyden Authority. And by incorporating this into the NEPA analysis, this allows the forest to bring one more tool to the toolbox for implementation of shared stewardship, in addition to the tools that are already being used by IDL and the Natural Resource Conservation Service. So that's pretty exciting. Finally, at our boots on the ground meeting, we discussed many opportunities with the BLM on the northern section, and out of the Cottonwood Field Office, and they're also excited to be working with us. The decision is scheduled for the fall of 2021, and hopefully we'll bring this project together with, and it'll be a shining example for shared stewardship. So, in summary, 2021, we're going to be really focusing on our relationships and our coordination with the NRCS, BLM, IDL, and Forest Service. We're going to really start engaging with our partners at the earliest stages of the project. And we have multiple tools to complete treatments. We're going to try to plan and schedule these things as best as possible. We're going to be nimble, we're going to try to be flexible, and we're going to be mighty. So with that, I'll turn this over to Jeff to go for the second part of the presentation. I will stop sharing.
Thanks, Lynn. All right, give me a thumbs up, Peg, if you can see my screen cursor. Sweet. Can you still see it? Thumbs up. Sweet. Well, thanks, Lynn, for that great presentation on the South Area landscape. My name is Jeff Lau. I'm the North Idaho Shared Stewardship Coordinator, and I'm just going to give you a quick overview and status update of the North Idaho landscape, similar to Lynn. Let's see here. The North Idaho landscape is approximately 2 million acres in size, as mentioned earlier. I think that it is important to understand that 51% of the landscape is privately owned, and even more importantly, 39% is non-industrial private lands. 12% industrial lands, only 41% of the priority landscape is public. So where do we start? Recognizing the ownership distribution within the landscape, I think we all can agree that no one entity on their own can make the changes needed that we need to across the landscape. Similar to the southern area landscape, September through December of 2019 really was spent communicating, collaborating, and identifying common land management objectives. As does any good plan, we started with communication. We first hosted a meeting with leadership from Forest Service, IDL, County Emergency Management, BLM, and NRCS. And as we increased and improved our communication with our partners, we have been able to develop stronger relationships. We have learned more about each other's strengths and how we, as a collective group, might be able to best utilize each other's resources to maximize our collective effort within this landscape. As we collaborated with each other, we quickly identified and really rallied around addressing the forest health and coincidentally the fire risk to communities as our common land management objective. This group also identified the need to more clearly direct or focus our initial cross-boundary work to address the forest health and fire risk within the 2 million acre landscape. Each partner shared their out-year program of work and discussed factors such as cross-boundary opportunities, known local interest, and general support. And just, I'm gonna give it, on the right-hand side of your screen, really demonstrates the work that was pulled together that led us to the designation of our 2 focal areas within the landscape. Obviously, the first green polygons would be Forest Service out-year program, blue being IDL. And to continue on, pink dots are county interested private landowners and is interested in forestry assistance. And the pink polygons are county MOUs, or areas that grant funding will most likely be spent within the landscape. Light blue areas are NRCS's areas of interest that they would like to focus on within the landscape. And lastly, our 2 focal areas. First focal area being the Southwest Bonner County here that I'm circling. And just most recently, actually in the last maybe month, we just really formalized the North Kootenai County focal area based on partners' interest. And as you can see, there is no shortage of opportunities or interest amongst our partners. We have identified several short and midterm opportunities within the two focal areas, approximately 18,000 acres of commercial treatment and 14,000 acres of non-commercial treatments have been identified. But now what? Some of you might even be asking, what makes the work within these two focal areas different than the work that we always have done or would have done anyway? I'll try to highlight a little bit of what we've accomplished and why I feel that these are different. Let's just focus on the Southwest Bonner County focal area, but recognize that similar work is occurring within the North Kootenai focal area as well. First, the Forest Service Scattered Lands Project, the green polygons here on the map, was developed by IDL GNA foresters alongside a Forest Service fuel specialist. Second, the Hoodoo Valley Hazardous Fuels Project is targeting interested private landowners within the MOU here in the center of that focal area. But not only interested private landowners, they are planning to target their outreach in areas adjacent to planned IDL and Forest Service projects. Third, in addition to the existing endowment timber sale program, about 1,000 acres are treated annually in this area. The local IDL fire warden and foresters have identified 400 additional hazardous fuels acres on endowment lands within the Hoodoo Valley MOU within this area here in support of the collective effort that we have in this focal area. Fourth, we have already started to prioritize our on-the-ground treatments, focusing on the highest risk areas. Several other factors have led to the prioritization of our treatments, including connectivity of treatments, slope and aspect, public interest, ingress, egress, and several others. Here, going to highlight just a couple more things, so stick with me. It's kind of long-winded slides, these next two, but identifying cross-boundary solutions and investing resources within the focal area. NRCS is planning to prioritize their equip funding in areas such as this focal area where there is joint interest and will most likely be considered in their ranking and evaluation process for equip funds. Likewise, Bonner County Emergency Management already has a signed MOU and has received $240,000 to implement approximately 184 acres of hazardous fuels treatments, and being included in an effort such as shared stewardship will most likely be an evaluation criteria for future grant proposals. This work identified within both focal areas, as well as a few other priority areas outside of these focal areas, will be included in this year's Joint Chiefs Landscape Restoration Partnership proposal, a competitive funding proposal request that will help fund the implementation of work both on and off public lands. Proposals this year will be evaluated on coordination across landscapes, ownerships, and linkage to the shared stewardship principles, State Forest Action Plan, for instance, and the shared stewardship agreement that you all are familiar with. Outreach and communication opportunities. Greg Becker, a local NRCS district conservationist, has volunteered to lead the private land joint outreach within the focal area in conjunction with Bonner County Office of Emergency Management and IDL's private forestry specialists. Collectively, we have already participated in each other's reoccurring meetings to share our collaborative effort as a team. We are also planning to include each other's projects and associated opportunities, such as public involvement on federal projects or links to each other's web pages, projects, contact information, landowner assistance program within our individual outreaches to our specific public. So increasing that net of potential publics that might know about what we are doing. This is just a summary of what I've just covered. Improved communication with partners. We have collaboratively identified two focal areas. we're prioritizing and identifying treatments together and exploring each other's resources that might be able to fund that work on the ground. I think one notable accomplishment is that we are working to develop and have developed outreach and communication products that will be using that not only when the Forest Service sends out something to the public, it'll also have for if you're a private landowner that has interest in managing your land, for assistance contact. So really we're advocating for each other in every aspect that we really can think of. There's still a lot to do, but as we continue to improve our communication and relationships with partners, we will be more successful within the North Idaho landscape and across the state, honestly. And hopefully by this time next year, we'll be able to actually meet in person and possibly even go to the field to highlight some of our accomplishments to date. With that, Peg, that's all I've got.
Great job. Thank you, Jeff. You can see that this is a complex situation. We're trying to figure out where the greatest risks are, where we have willing landowners to work with, and do that alignment business to have more effective, a more effective use of our public and private dollars on these lands. So with that, we have 5 to 10 minutes for questions. Any thoughts you might have for our 2 priority landscape coordinators? Go ahead and unmute yourself or raise your hand so that I can see you. Go ahead, John Roberts.
Question really for both of them. And both of them have to do with the private non-commercial or non-industrial. First place, the private land in the south, I think probably is not just forest land. There's a lot of open land, pastures and that sort of thing. Land, do you have a feel for that?
Yes, you're absolutely correct. Is that some of the area in the southern priority landscape includes a lot of grassland, pastures and such.
Any guess on how much is forested?
Go ahead and repeat that question, John.
Well, I just wondering if you had any idea on how much of it's forested. From my knowledge of it, it's probably about 50 or 60%. 40% maybe forested, something like that. Lynn, do you have a feel for that?
No, I don't, but that's a good metric. We should have at the tip of my tongue. But I think you're rough. It's over 50%.
Yeah, just trying to get a feel for how important this, and I got the same question for Jeff Lau. A different question: how much of that non-industrial is I saw your picture with all the homes on it. How much of that is somebody's backyard, 5-acre lot type stuff, or is there an opportunity really to work on non-industrial lands up there as well?
So how much of it, sorry, to clarify your question, the large portion of it, the percentage breakdown is largely non-industrial. So really that's your folks that own within the Scattered Lands Project area, that's anywhere from, your 1/4 of an acre to landowners that actually own upward 200-300+ acres. So there's great opportunity for us to really collaborate with our partners, which we've already done and invested resources in through ARIS shop, through the Forestry Assistance Program, as well as NRCS. NRCS has a long history of completing fuels reduction work within both priority landscapes. And so we're really set up well to work with that non-industrial. To be honest with you, an area that I need to start focusing in more strongly is how can I work with more of the large industry that happens to reside within the priority landscapes.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
I got a quick question. And maybe this actually might be covered later in terms of the CFLR updates, in terms of the projects that are within those the north and southern shared stewardship priority areas, and maybe that's something that will be covered later. But just wanted to try to get an update on those when we as part of today.
Thanks, John Robeson. Just a moment. One thing we need to do is to not use agency acronyms, or at least explain what they are. I'm going to let one of the Forest Service people explain what the CFLR investments are from the national office. Who wants to do that? Jeff? Jeff Lau, do you want to take that question? You're muted, Jeff. Okay, never mind.
I'll go for it.
Go ahead, Lynn.
So CFLRP, Collaborative Forest Landscape Restoration Program. That is funding coming off the top from the national office, making large investments over a 10-year period. They're national competitions. Yeah, the final selections is done by an advisory group, and the recommendations go to the Secretary of Agriculture for which projects should be funded.
Very good.
Sorry, Pat, my computer was trying to force a shutdown, and it had a pop-up over on my second screen, and when I sat there clicking on my mute button, it would not work.
No worries, Jeff. Thanks. We got that. So we'll talk a little bit more about CFLRP investments in Idaho later on, just so you know. I
believe Cheryl had a comment on that.
Go ahead, Cheryl.
No, not on that. Just wanted to, I have a different question.
Okay, let's do that.
Okay, so, listening to this and not being a forest in a priority landscape, my first question is, how do we, how have you guys envisioned real-time information and lessons learned and opportunity sharing? Because if we do it the way we typically do in the Forest Service, our 5 years will be up, and then we'll be learning lessons from you guys and piling on. So I'm wondering what mechanisms you've thought about, or that we need to collectively think about, so that we can get more real-time ideas, information, etc. sharing.
I'll take a shot at that, Cheryl. So one of the things that Lynn and I and Jeff have noticed is lots of people want to know more about what we're doing and how we're doing it. How do you work on non-federal lands and so on? And what we're doing is trying to be more inclusive. One, we want to be invited to every meeting, the leadership team meetings and so on from the National Forest, and bring these presentations to them. And also to be more inclusive with people in the webinars and the meetings that we have online. Lynn and I had a meeting with the Salmon Chalice National Forest last week. They're not in a priority landscape, but we have some state federal business to attend to or to assist the forest with, and maybe Chuck will talk about that. So we're going to get better at this. We're going to hit our stride as we learn, and we will make more of these discussions widely available. We'll continue to work with the Idaho Forest Restoration Partnership and the Forest Collaboratives. We're just going to keep opening up the circle so that more people can learn. Anyone else?
So Peg, I would also highlight that myself, I'm participating in the local pod meetings. That is pod, that's our 6th Forest and Region 4 in Idaho with the Timber and Fuels Group, having monthly to bi-monthly discussions, trying to give updates. We need to keep working at the staff level, sharing things when we get them. I think Cheryl Probert's highlighted the challenge is we just need to be over communicating to as many venues as possible.
Peg?
Go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, I might add Lynn's observation of increased participation in pods, you know, Tyler Ashcroft is he's the Region 4 Shared Stewardship Coordinator. And Leanne Martin, the Regional Forester in Missoula, and Nora, prior to her retirement, but followed through with Frank Bim, Acting Regional Forester, are using Tyler as a conduit to assure that there's consistent communication at the Regional Forester level across Idaho. I know that Tyler's also been engaged in convening all of the Idaho Forest Supervisors to periodically update. And so that might be another opportunity, another place to share best practices or outcomes that can advance efforts outside of the priority areas.
Yep. Thanks, Tim. Anyone else, comments or questions before we move on? Curtis, are you?
All right. So what we're doing at NRCS to, I guess, combat, I guess, the challenges of real time successes out there is soon, very soon, every conservation planner for NRCS will have a cell phone. And I'm really encouraging each of these planners to take photos to then send them to our public affairs officer for screening and all that kind of sort. And then we upload them into our website and other social media type of situations. So it's real time. We can't always get out there and one or two people get out there and take photos and capture these success stories that are going on continually. So we're asking our staff, which we have right now about 90 planners in the state, to help us out with that. And I'm looking forward to seeing the results of that. And then also, I think Jeff mentioned about the screening and ranking of NRCS projects in these priority areas as well. And he's absolutely correct on that. In fact, the local led work groups that we've set up here in Idaho, the 17 of them, they determine the screening and ranking questions as to where the programs would have the greatest impact. So we are adopting a screening and ranking system, but working together with all the other partners. And we have 155 different conservation practices that we administer on the ground on private land that do affect private land or public land as well. So, and we have just one more thing. You know, I envision our state forester, but not just our state forester being available, but our state soil scientists for soil health in the forest. I envision also our state water quality specialists getting involved, our state biologist, our state programs manager, obviously, for the programs that we have to offer, and then our state engineer. There may be some engineering practices out there that could lend in these priority areas as well. So we have a lot of resources to offer up in my staff. We've made this a priority here for Idaho and for NRCS. So there's just so many things, I guess, that we can do. We're such a diverse agency, and it's not just private land, although we do primarily work on private land, but it's a culture mindset change for my staff to realize that we don't just work on private land anymore.
Great. Thank you, Curtis. Great comments. We're trying to figure out how to work across landscapes and be more effective. We're going to move on to the next section now. Thank you for your comments. Our landscape coordinators will be around later for the discussion so we can get more clarity. So one of the heaviest lifts in our Idaho agreement is the aspiration and the commitment for the national forests in Idaho, all of the national forests in Idaho collectively, to scale up and to double the numbers of acres treated from a baseline of about 50,000 acres to 100,000 acres in 5 years. So that's a really heavy lift. It's very complex. And we have a couple of our forest supervisors that are going to address the strategic thinking that the forest supervisors have been doing to meet that commitment or that aspiration. So we have Cheryl Probert from Nez Perce Clearwater National Forest and Chuck Mark from the Salmon Chalice to give us that discussion. Both of these forest supervisors are not in the priority landscapes that have been identified in Idaho, but clearly they have shared stewardship thinking going on around their national forests. So go ahead, Cheryl and Chuck. You need to unmute yourselves. And Chuck, I see you're unmuted. Cheryl? There you go.
Okay, thanks. So we're going to try and share. Got my screen shared. We're going to share this presentation. So that is definitely the word of the day. So thank you for the invite to participate. I hope you all noticed that after the governor's statement, I did change my background. So it's now trees. And that was a good eye. It was definitely not just weeds. Anyway, so now I got to make sure there we go. So we're going to talk about a little bit, the beginning of this is a little bit on what have we done, because a year and a half has gone by, and we were doing a lot of amazing work ahead of time and before the shared stewardship MOU, and that carries forward into where we are right now. So a little bit about what the Idaho forests have accomplished and how we've done it. You know, we are currently using all of our available tools, really leading out on different forests in a lot of different areas. The agency has its environmental analysis and decision-making initiative along with forest products modernization. And those two things together on the EADM, on the planning side, forest products modernization on the implementation side are really designed to help us get more work done out on the ground. We have a lot of farm bill authorities, as you know, and every forest is utilizing those wherever we can. We're also using Healthy Forest Restoration Initiative authorities to really streamline our analysis and to improve our collaboration. And I think that's, you know, again, one of those key elements of this whole shared stewardship is that collaboration piece. As you all know, and we saw, we have Good Neighbor Authority going on across all of the forests. We've been highly successful and brought in millions of dollars into program revenue that we've then been able to turn over into other program areas, and to continue to increase the amount of work we're getting done on our forests and in our communities. Used a lot more contracting. I think we've kind of maxed out some of our local contractors in terms of analysis, and that's a cool thing, because that's really building industry, building that that economic component in our state that's really critical. We do have new CEQ regulations, Council of Environmental Quality regulations on how we implement the National Environmental Policy Act. We are very hopeful that a lot of those are going to further this trend on really streamlining our analyses, particularly where we're doing the same thing over and over again. And then maybe it allows us to focus more time on monitoring of what the impacts really are, that then are going to really beef up our subsequent projects. So you see, one of the things that Boise is led out on is this vegetation condition-based management guide. It's intended so that we can make decisions on, if we find these conditions out on the ground, we will do this activity and it will have this, you know, effect. And as long as we're within that framework, then we don't have to do a lot of data collection up front. We can do it, make those decisions as our folks are out on the field. So you're really not traveling the same chunk of ground 3 times. You're traveling it once or twice. On the Nez Clear, we're doing a similar thing with our looper moth infestation around Elk City. So what are the results of this? Well, you can see on the Boise alone, in 2016, the 10-year average was about 14 million board foot, and projections for 20 to 24 are 32.7. So really basically doubling our timber output on the Boise. They've done some additional things, and it's interesting. We're spanning 2 regions, right? So there's strategic out-year planning in Region 4, and in Region 1 we have a strategic out-year planning that is region-wide, that incorporates our. It's basically showing where we have forest condition needs, fuels needs, and industry to help us really make sure that we're prioritizing our efforts in the right places. Additional forest collaboration, the Boise Payette has their own timber marking strike team. Region 1, we have a regional strike team, but the North Idaho forests are now sharing and thinking about, hey, do we need maybe a shared strike team? So in the North Idaho forests, we've already doubled our volume sold, and are looking at moving from where we are right now, around 145 million to 175 million board feet over the next few years. We have additional forest collaboratives. We, on the Nez Clear, a couple of months ago, we just signed a Good Neighbor Authority agreement with Idaho Fish and Game. And we've been having meetings with IDL, Idaho Fish and Game, and the forest to collectively share resources and skill sets. And I know IDL and Idaho Fish and Game have done tremendous work trying to streamline the transfer of money between state agencies. We've again been using those existing and new NEPA authorities. Region 1 has I don't know if it's a goal or a directive. We're pretending it's a directive from our regional forester to do categorical exclusions in 6 months and EAs in 9 months. And we are meeting that, and we've got examples of 24-page EA and for a 3,000 acre sale on the Palouse. As soon as our Senator Johnson volume hits the books, the Nez Perce Clearwater is going to have the 3rd highest timber volume sold so far in the nation in 2020. That's huge. And it really demonstrates that Idaho moving out. Other thing as we move forward that really we are not sure exactly how this is going to play into the strategic part, but then the Nez's forest plan revision, our alternatives go, our potential timber sale quantity, which is not ASQ, it's something different, but it's kind of the same, is from 70, the alternatives range from 70 to 242 million board feet a year. The 242 is a departure from sustained yield. 70 is our lowest alternative that would get us to desired conditions in 50 to 60 years. We're also doing a lot of work around fuels reduction. In North Idaho, in 2016, the 2 forests had about 2,400 acres in WUI. And in 2019, we did about 7,500 acres in WUI. So y'all can do the math on that plan. And then we're planning a 20 to 30% increase over the next 5 years. We're doing some innovative stuff. We've purchased a masticator, and right now we're working on converting some of our commercial contracts to utilizing the Nez Perce tribes masticators to try to really build that. The salmon chalice, when I was looking in our dashboards, for FY20 had the 3rd highest fields accomplishment in the nation. So there you go again, the Idaho leading out. And there's been a lot of exploration about using GNA to fund IDL to help with prescribed fire. And Panhandle's been working on that. We're hoping to capitalize. Of course, using retained receipts and stewardship items for fuels projects that can't pay their way out of the woods. We have a couple of helicopter units we're working on the Nez Clear, paying for because the lumber won't pay for itself, but there's still that economic component. Improvements in planning. We're eagerly waiting to see how the other forests implement their forest-wide fuel CE and capitalize on that. And of course, expanding across the state, this idea, especially in North Idaho, of doing some prescribed burning during the summer in our fire season in our inventoried roadless areas and our significant backcountry. Just for those of you who have been together with us on the Oro Grande Community Protection Project, this is a picture of the last unit that that timber sale in the inventoried roadless area right next to town, and we were just doing burn and slash this spring. So again, that's a great example of these sorts of shared stewardship where we support each other all the way through the project. So you see some other ones that I've talked about, the salmon chalice, conducting the feasibility study with RMRS and the University of Idaho to really look at forest products related industry. We're working right now with Oregon State, IFG, Danielson, and a bunch of others to look at tethered logging and how that can work on and still reduce the soils impact. So maybe we can actually accomplish more work on our steeper slopes. And really bring industry in as a partner. I think that's one of the key pieces of this that we're very fortunate in a lot of places on the state. Industry is a partner, they're way out ahead in a lot of these innovations. And sometimes us, it's taking us a bit to catch up with them.
Hey, Cheryl, I'll inject a few comments in here in regards to the prescribed fire restoration and the feasibility study. We've got two of the other forests here in Region 4, the sawtooth and the CT, the caribou targhee, and we're next in the silo that are looking at basically analyzing our entire forest outside of wilderness regards to use of prescribed fire as a tool, and we're looking at using the authority to make decision through a categorical exclusion on acres that don't have any extraordinary circumstances to be able to accomplish that. And the sawtooth and the CT are leading in that front. We've here on the salmon chalice, we've touched the tip of the iceberg there with a couple of recent decisions. One as recently as yesterday, the ranger down at the Lost River Ranger District at Mackey made a decision on a prescribed fire project for 114,000 acres, utilizing a categorical exclusion, category 6 under the chief's categories. And and using this, Cheryl mentioned earlier, this condition-based concept in regards to, we described the conditions that we need to treat and change, and the conditions that we're shooting for as far as desired conditions. And then, analyzing those on how we get from point A to point B to make, to get those outcomes. And then the mechanical pieces that we would do after the decision in regards to our consultation processes with the State Historic Preservation Officer and the regulatory agencies if necessary, such as National Marine Fisheries Service, Fish and Wildlife Service, and identifying those places on the landscape where those conditions occur. And then we proceed to delineate, define those treatment areas, and try to do that over vast landscapes, so we've got as much flexibility as possible to be able to deal with the unexpected events such as wildfires that impact sometimes our best planning that we do. So, and then another example I would put out there is a categorical exclusion that I signed earlier this winter in regards to conifer encroachment in sage grouse habitat. And we're looking at trying to change that fire regime, which is much different with conifers encroaching upon sagebrush grassland ecosystems, and improve, remove that predator cover that impacts sage grouse populations over upwards of 200,000 acres across the forest. So, again, it's a little bit different look than, what Cheryl described in regards to the forested ecosystems and what Lynn and Jeff described, but certainly extremely important in regards to restoration and expanding the scope and scale of accelerating that restoration. In regards to the feasibility study that working with Dennis Becker and his folks at University of Idaho and Nate Anderson, Rocky Mountain Research Station, here on the forest and kind of centered around Custer County on the Chalice end of the forest, to try to see what we can do to reinvigorate some sort of forest products industry in and around the forest here. I think folks that are familiar with this part of Idaho, we're challenged. We're challenged with not having the forest products infrastructure that we used to have. And so in order to try to see if we can create some demand, we're working with the University of Idaho and, like I said, the research station to see if there's some possibilities out there to try to restart and or reinvigorate some local economies here of scale that might be able to help us with implementing treatments and having an outlet for those treatments on the forest here to be able to help facilitate accelerating again that scope and scale of restoration out there on the national forest.
Thanks,
Cool.
Chuck. Cheryl, do you have some more?
Just one more, and then I'm turning the rest over to Chuck. And that is, you alluded to it earlier, I think, John, and it's that really the importance of talking about restoration holistically and how all of these increases, and especially in our forested veg project, really do good work across all these different resource areas. And one little more data snippet, I was looking in our national databases, and over the past 5 years, while we've doubled our timber outputs, the Nez Clear, for example, is 4th in the nation for the miles of stream habitat restored. So I think that's something for the communications group to really help in terms of building that social license. And then I'm gonna screen share for Chuck to talk about the strategy going forward. Sorry, Chuck,
No, it's all right.
I was all excited to be done and closed down.
Okay, I think, if I had to, provide a brief summary here, we've talked about, the forest outside of the priority landscapes, and, all the reasons that have been exhibited and talked about in regards to identifying those priority landscapes in the north and south ends of the state are extremely valid. But, things are still going to keep happening in the rest of the forest here in the state. And so, what do we do about that? And in order to, if we're looking at doubling, I think by 2025, our number of acres that are seeing active management, everybody's going to have to contribute. And so that's the question that's out there. How are we going to do that? I know we're somewhat shifting our portfolio here, at least proposing to do that here in Region 4, and certainly that composes the forest of Southern Idaho, in that one of our strengths is the use of fire. And so, I talked a little bit earlier about, these forest-wide analyses, looking at the use of prescribed fire, as a tool. We've done some, I'll say, preliminary analysis, and you look at Southern Idaho, we're probably treating fuels-wise, for regards to fuels treatment, probably 60 to 80,000 acres a year right now. We should be probably 4 times that. If you look at fire cycles, we should be 4 times that. So that's a dramatic increase. And I think, we're ramping up the planning end of things to be able to do that. But, I was just having a conversation with my fire staff yesterday. We're starting to get some, I'll call it shelf volume, using a timber term. And that, the real challenge is going to be how we're going to implement this. And, partnerships are going to be extremely critical moving forward. Bringing along our local collaborative groups, which I think is a real strength in this state since I've worked in Idaho for many years. Bringing them along is going to be extremely important. But we also need, you look at this slide here talking about a balanced portfolio. All these tools in regards to the use of timber harvest, mechanical treatment in non-commercial acres, and then the use of fire, not only prescribed burning, but the use, I'll say wise use of wildland fire, which is, our primary tool in central Idaho with the vast, 2-3 wilderness areas we've got in the center of the state, is going to be very important as we move forward with this comprehensive strategy throughout the state. So, we're at, we've got a baseline of approximately 50,000 acres of what we looked at. So, we're looking at, trying to double that here in the next, 5 years. And we think we've got that, we certainly got the need. There's no doubt about that. The challenge moving forward is how we leverage our resources. We've touched, folks have touched upon that this morning in regards to the various authorities we have in the planning arena, the authorities where we're starting to share work across boundaries, especially with the state of Idaho, using the Good Neighbor Authority. And so, we need to keep continuing to think along those lines in regards to, okay, what can we do different to be able to get this different outcome that we're shooting for, in which to promote much more active management out there in the landscape and reduce the impacts of insect and disease infestations, reduce the impacts of wildfire that we do not want, and reduce, and try to promote more healthy and more resilient, I'll say, forested and rangeland ecosystems that are out there. Another example I'll put forward is we've had some preliminary discussions, and I think Jeff touched upon this with some of my partners across the state line with Beaverhead Deer Lodge National Forest and the Bitterroot, looking at a much bigger shared landscape in regards to how we can leverage, I'll say, each other's efforts in regards to putting out more attractive timber sale offerings. Right now, I've got a timber sale that's going over the hill, going into Montana. It's going up to Seeley Lake, up to Pyramid Lumber, which is fine. That's supporting the forest products industry, but to present some complications in regards to, supporting our, I'll say our respective areas, regions, states, etc. So how do we get beyond that? How do we look at a more comprehensive picture in which, our success is everybody's success in reaching this much larger aspirational goal of, doubling the treatment acres here in Idaho? I think that's the big question that's out there.
Yeah, I think that it's interesting because we've had a similar thing go on with, we've now had 2 sales that we had additional, we had Pyramid purchase And we think that's a great thing as well. And then we had another Clearwater paper came out and purchased a sale off the shelf. So we're seeing an expansion of industry into at least our area as well with our expansion on work and the work we're doing. So I think that's a really critical piece of this. And we're also talking with the Lolo about potentially using the same model the Colville did on their A to Z project with our North Fork backcountry and the area out of Mineral County in Montana. So I don't know if, again, that's a place where there's a lot of people that probably have more information on that than I do. And it'd sure be nice to share that, have a more hands-on place to share that. So.
All right. Very good. Thanks, Chuck, and thank you, Cheryl. Great presentation. We have a few minutes here before we go to a 10-minute break. Does anyone have any particular questions for Cheryl or Chuck Mark? We'll have time later for in the full conversation as well. Tom Schultz, I see your hand.
Yeah, Peg, thanks. Really appreciate your comments there. And, you know, the discussion about Montana, I kind of alluded to it earlier with the Montana Forest Action Council, but to the extent that we can break down those barriers between the states, I think that's good. You know, there's volume that will likely flow out of the Nez Clear into St. Regis as well. So the fact that volume is going through the region, that's not a problem. I mean, most of the logging contractors and the haulers work across state lines. When you survey that, over 90% of the haulers work in Idaho and Montana. So the fact that volume is flowing into Montana, out of Montana, into Idaho, to me, we're all in this together. The issue I wanted to bring up, though, is, you know, I didn't mention it earlier, but in terms of threats to the work that we're talking about getting done, doubling acres, increasing management, A to Z projects, trying to increase restoration, there is a significant threat from litigation out there. And I cannot understate the impact. There's a sale that we purchased on the Nez Clear, the Fanbit sale, 14 million feet. That whole EIS is about 40 million feet. That was just a notice of intent to sue was just put on that forest. Region 1 is probably one of, if not the most litigious region. It is number 2 next to Region 6. But there's an issue called the Cottonwood case that came out back in 15 that there's been an effort to address this, has not been fully addressed yet. There was legislation was just introduced by Senator Daines, Senator Risch, and Senator Crapo here about a month ago to fix this. There's another bill, a bipartisan bill with Senator Daines and Senator Feinstein. There's also a rulemaking effort that is going on right now with Fish and Wildlife Service and the Forest Service to fix this issue. Western Governors is also trying to get together a bipartisan letter to support this fix, but suffice it to say that forest plans have the potential to be completely shut down. There was a notice of intent to sue over grizzly bear access amendments that went back to 2011, that litigation was filed, or the notice of intent to sue was filed about a year ago, and that has delayed over 20 million feet on the Kootenai because of that, triggered consultation, which pushed more volume to be directed to the Lolo and even into the Panhandle to make up for the lack of volume on the Kootenai. So keep in mind, we talk about, you know, strategy in Region 1 crosses Idaho and Montana. So if the Kootenai forest underperforms, Region 1 is going to look to other forests in Region 1 to make up that volume. And so you cannot help but look across the region at these things. So I guess I would encourage this group to understand the real impacts. I mean, that litigation that was filed in grizzly bear access amendments, the initial goal was to shut down the Lolo forest, the Kootenai forest, and the Panhandle forest. They identified 145 projects under those plans to be shut down. And the litigation basically says, anytime there's new information that has not been considered in a forest plan, could be a master's thesis, the term new information is not defined, we have the potential to shut down every project in a forest plan. It's completely irrational. So I guess to me, that is probably one of the greatest threats that's out there. That to me, a group like this that could come together and support a fix like that, that now we do have legislation introduced. There's going to be more legislation introduced. There's going to be rules that are introduced. But if we can get support from a group like this to address that issue, that I think that threat is probably the greatest threat that's out there in my mind. So just wanted to put that on the record.
I would agree. I think that we've seen that especially when we're using new tools. And I'm in the next month, hopefully going to sign 3 NEPA decisions that will be over 350 million board feet of shelf stock and probably about 20 to 30,000 acres of fuels reduction in high priority areas. And, you know, only one of those is probably safe from litigation. So it's going to be a significant thing, but.
I can just make one comment on that too, if I have a chance.
Go ahead, John, and then I have a question for the group. Go ahead, John Robeson.
Sure. So one thing just to say that the collaboratives also have a potential role to play, not just in partnering with the Forest Service in crafting projects that meet local concerns, but also staying with those projects and shepherding them through the NEPA process and doing outreach and then following up afterwards in terms of the objection process and potential legal challenges. And so collaboratives have been, you know, if there's broad support for a project, the collaboratives have been weighing in with supportive objections or filing amicus briefs or even intervening in cases, and that's been successful on a number of projects, including the A to Z forest project, where you actually had, in this case, it was actually AFRC that helped intervene in that one. But anyway, so there's definitely a role for the collaboratives, and that's just another way that if you do design and craft a project that's holistic in nature, that addresses multiple.
I don't know why it keeps blinking out. It's our system.
That was all.
Thanks, John. Quick question for the group. We had scheduled a 10-minute break. This is a really robust conversation, and my question for you all is, would you like to take that break, or can we just move right into our next section and then people take their breaks as needed? We only have about 30 minutes left to have a full conversation. I'd like to see a show of hands who's good to go to keep moving on and take this thing home. Okay, very good. I see you all. Very good. We'll do that. Take your break as you need it. This has been great. Thank you, Chuck and Cheryl, for bringing us up to speed with what's happening with the National Forests in Idaho and how you're contributing to this process. So next up, Dustin and Brian, you were going to lead the next conversation to see if we're on track and where else we might need to head.
All right. I think everybody can hear me. Len and I have been struggling here with the computer audio in this conference room. So yeah, Brian and I are going to take this one, and it's really I'm really not a facilitator. I've been known to, I guess, facilitate a good discussion at a happy hour. But for the purposes of this meeting, or this section of the meeting, we just want to open it up. You've heard, you know, the governor's remarks. You've heard the updates and the progress being made with the subcommittees. The progress being made on the 2 landscapes, which is very remarkable given the short amount of time that this effort has been underway. The work from other national forests that are outside of the priority landscapes, which is certainly an important component here, given the effort to try to achieve that 100,000 acre treatment mark, which just looking at the information and hearing the discussion, I can't help but feel confident that 5 years, it is a lofty goal, but given the things, the tools that we have, the authorities that we have, the treatment ideas on the landscape, I feel confident that that's an attainable goal. So it's exciting and it's inspiring to hear all of this work, all of the efforts going into this to date, the staffing up at IDL, Forest Service, NRCS, which is great to have Curtis and his team as partners in this effort, the funding commitments that are being made. The Idaho legislature approved the governor's budget last year, as Craig talked about, the handful of positions for GNA and shared stewardship that were authorized, along with $250,000 for on-the-ground treatments, which is a good start. And couple that with grant opportunities and funding that have come to the state for this effort, it seems like the foundation is there. But for purposes of this discussion, we just really want to open it up to talk about lessons learned so far. And it might be more appropriate, those that have been working closer to the ground to jump in here and talk about some of those challenges, some of the things we've learned, the challenges, where we need to go. What are the gaps? What are the data gaps? Who are we missing at the table, or what are we missing? And some of the ideas, some of the opportunities we've heard today. What are some of these big ideas that you all, as part of the advisory group, feel that we need to chase down to make sure that we are advancing with this initiative? A big part of this discussion and this meeting today is to really create some additional momentum here, and we've done that based on the information that's been shared today, the things that are happening on the ground, and the things that we've tackled so far. So Brian, I'll let you jump in here if there's anything you want to add to that, but really this is just an open dialogue, open discussion. I don't think there's a ton of shy people as part of this committee, but we'd like to open it up. Brian, is there something you'd like to add there?
No, just real quick, Dustin, thank you, and to everyone for the discussions today. And I think on the next steps part of this, as we conclude this meeting and think about where do we want to go from here. It occurs to me that we're, depends on when you start counting, but at approximately the conclusion of year one. And there is a lot to show for it, both in terms of actual work on the ground and on building that foundation that Dustin talked about, that hopefully puts us in a position to be really active on the ground in the year to come. So I recommend that we think about everything in the context of next steps, about what we want to demonstrate we've done and what we want to do in the future, and that's certainly been part of this discussion. I kind of put out in that vein that we'll come to the conclusion of really the ability to do work on the ground in a few months, which might be good timing for us to really do that assessment of what's been accomplished, and to be setting goals for the coming year, to be working on those as we move through the winter, and then literally and figuratively hit the ground running during breakup next spring. So those are my thoughts, and look forward to hearing from others.
I had just one thought, and this might be something that perhaps IFRP could play a role in, or an upcoming boots on the ground meeting. As we have successes and breakthroughs on things, I think it's really important just to share that with this network and the advisory group and say, hey, here's what worked over here. Also, if folks have spectacular fails for some reason, that is good information too. That's good data. And so I think it's really important just to have keep folks in the loop in terms of, here's a strategy that worked well here. Here's how we had to tweak things, adaptive management. And because the more we compare notes, the better on this. There's also the challenge, of course, of supporting collaborative policies and frameworks in this new COVID realm. There's I think a webinar that's available later this week about taking your collaborative online in a way that works for people. And so so I think that I would please just remember to use everyone as this group as a reference and a resource, and bounce ideas off of and share the highs and lows. And that's just a really good, I think, a really good sounding board here.
Hey, John, can you share the link maybe to that webinar in the chat box? Because we're trying to move forward with one of our Limber Elk project collaboratively, and any advice. We put some other projects a bit on hold, but we're trying to move out. I think that would be really helpful.
Yeah, I'll share that in the chat. And I haven't, this is an upcoming webinar, so I haven't been to it and say this solved all my problems. But we're not alone in these problems. And I think there's actually some, the example they used here was helpful in bringing a collaborative together so they didn't lose momentum. And that's the biggest thing we're concerned about, is losing momentum. So I'll share that in the chat in a second.
A question I have for you all is, we'd heard about the 8 uniquely Idaho principles, and we also put forward a draft communication strategy for you all. And for those of us who like to tie a ribbon around things and produce final results, do we have any comments on those guiding principles, or on the communications plan, or can we get a thumbs up with minor revision? Any thoughts there? I'm seeing a lot of thumbs up. People think it captures the essence of what we're trying to do. Good. Okay. Very good. I'm not seeing any objections. So those are some things that we'll finalize and will be our legacy documents for our guidance forward. We can always revise at a later date. Thank you for that. Any other comments? Tom Schultz, I see your hand up.
Yeah, Peg, I think I have a question. Ara, this is for you. I'm kind of curious how you see shared stewardship and the priority landscapes tying into the forest action plan. And I know we talked earlier about metrics and reporting and those things. And in my mind, ideally, this issue of reporting across these priority landscapes could be accomplished through the forest action plan. But I'd hate to see us have a bunch of parallel work that's going on. And so I just put that out to you, Aaron, in terms of what are your thoughts on how stewardship aligns with the forest action plan? And we talk about monitoring, how that could maybe be rolled into what you're going to do already. And even your own thoughts on metrics and how what you were going to look at in terms of, statewide, how this could be complementary instead of additional, if that makes sense.
Sure. Can you hear me, first of all? Okay, well, good timing to ask. So what I'm going to share my screen here just to show you, Tom. This also responds to earlier questions you've had of me. So those of us working, really focusing on the focal areas within these shared stewardship priority landscapes, we are trying to really market and provide outreach to non-industrial private forest landowners to get this cross-boundary work truly cross-boundary. So what I'm showing you right now is I call it the In the Weeds Forest Action Plan Shared Stewardship Cross-Boundary website, which many of you will recognize because we did use the same Esri Hub format that Montana has used for their Forest Action Plan Shared Stewardship website. And we are just starting to populate this and get some good ideas out there. So how I see us kind of coming into this is we have for many grants and looked at opportunities to help non-industrial private landowners carry out these needed treatments adjacent to the project boundaries that the Panhandle and the Boise and the Payette National Forests have already defined. And we're just expanding on those, and you heard Lynn and Jeff talk about those. We've been extremely successful so far. We've been Forest Service and FEMA and other grants that we've applied for. So we're ready to get that message out there, work with our IDL private forestry specialists, the NRCS, district cons, and all of our consultants to market this, not just the word market. Why would people want to join on board with this effort, and what do they feel is really going to happen on those massive Forest Service acreages around them? As far as metrics and accomplishment reporting goes, right now we're focusing on what our grant providers, mainly the Forest Service, state and private forestry, are requiring for the metrics you report on grants. We're kind of looking to the to John's committee in your shared stewardship advisory group to see how we can cascade the metrics that you all come up with down to our level to kind of put those puzzle pieces into the big picture. Does that kind of answer your question about where we're going down here on the NIPF world?
I think it's good, thanks. And I think it's a great place to capture that broader discussion too. I mean, I envision some kind of annual report, right, that you're going to put together on the Forest Action Plan. And if you can integrate the shared stewardship piece, then that becomes one-stop shop for Idaho in terms of what we're doing.
Yeah, we will. We'll have, under this Data Explorer tab, we'll have a very similar page to what Montana has. You'll be able to get into any of our resource assessment data sets that we've used. And then on the shared stewardship tab, what's going to be interesting is we've got a brand new storybook format, and you can see here, these are just mock-ups, but you'll be able to go on this site and actually drill down into the focal areas, and turns into an ortho map, and you'll be able to click and point. We're going to have before and after pictures. We're going to have a lot of, instead of just showing metrics, acres treated, maybe where they are, we're going to actually have photos on the ground that, again, can speak to the layperson, can speak to the publics about what we're actually doing on national forest grounds, state grounds, and private.
Great, thanks, Ara. We have a couple other questions and people that want to engage. Dr. Becker, we have the University of Idaho as an asset and a part of this team. So Dr. Becker, would you like to join us?
Yeah, thanks, Peg. Peg asked me just to say a couple words about what we've been doing besides COVID planning. I have to admit that's all that I've been doing. So it's actually nice to get back into this conversation. We're still pretty busy working with partners like Chuck on the salmon chalice. I guess it's really good to hear the progress that's being made. We were part of some earlier conversations about how we might be able to help with some of the analysis, particularly sort of the 3 to 5 year and beyond out planning. Our folks are certainly still available to help with that. But I'd say probably where we're most active right now is really thinking about the overlays, sort of the economic data, in particular industrial data, and how those priority landscapes, those priority treatments translate in an economic sense. And so I feel a little selfish here just offering my services, but I would say that we're really trying to think about this across landscapes, and as so much as we can be helpful outside of those priority landscapes, that's probably where we might be able to provide the most assistance, just as we are with Chuck on the salmon chalice. So as I say, I feel a little sheepish, but we're here as a resource if you'd like to use us. I think we have a lot to offer in that space. So for what it's worth, that's my non-COVID response for the day.
Thanks,
Well, I'll
Dennis.
be hitting you up, Dennis.
Sounds good. Tim Garcia, you had a question or a comment?
Yeah, couple thoughts. One related to Dr. Becker there. You know, as the shared stewardship agreement was signed and the acknowledgement that it would take all efforts across the national forests in Idaho, yet the limited resources that the Forest Service gets have largely been directed at the priority areas. And so to the degree that any of the members of the Shared Stewardship Advisory Group or partners that maybe we're not thinking about could help support the efforts of those non-priority area forests, that would be really helpful, because we're not going to hit the doubling of acres with the same level of resource funding that we send to those national forests. And so we've got to be creative about how we support those forests, both financially, but also the relationship that those national forests have with the IDL area foresters and advancing programs and thinking about cross-boundary. The second thought that I had was related to Dustin and Brian's sort of ask on, okay, what next? What can we strive to accomplish? And I just threw out there as a challenge, you know, related to Era's comments, that we haven't really tested the true cross-boundary project design and implementation like I think we really can. And just to give you a sense of you know, Era mentioned that the metrics that she pays attention to are a function of the Forest Service's state and private financial assistance to IDL. We've, over the last 2 fiscal years, have kicked in about $8 million to IDL to accomplish forest restoration and forestry work on state and private lands. And I think a good challenge, Dustin and Brian, could be to identify and implement a project in the next fiscal year of real cross-boundary project implementation. That's not just good neighbor authority. That's not just treatment next to of national forests next to private lands, but that's really thinking about where there might be places that we can conduct those true cross-boundary work. Maybe it's one contractor working across boundaries. That would be a great test that we could replicate across the state when we've tested in these priority areas, as was the intention for the identification of the priority areas, was really testing grounds for new innovative ideas. So that might be one thing to consider, is a true cross-boundary project that includes state and private lands and national forest lands in each of the priority areas.
Thanks, Tim.
Peg, can I circle back to your question that you had for us?
Please.
Okay, I've been mulling it over during our discussions today, and obviously the world looks very different today than it did when the Shared Stewardship Advisory Group was established. And I'd suggest that most aspects or tenets of our work as a group to date are pretty timeless and rise above politics and a global pandemic and all the other actions that seem to consume our day-to-day conversations right now. But as I think about ensuring broader community support, I just wonder if we need to turn up the volume on certain aspects of our work due to the paradigm that we're currently facing and probably will for some time. Most folks are really interested in the economy, employment, their own personal health and safety, and heck, one of the safest places you can be right now is dispersed in Idaho's forest. And even how we receive information, just as this meeting that we're having today, we're all consuming information differently. So I guess I throw it out there. I don't have the solutions, but we may need to think about how we remain nimble and contemporary during this time to address the needs of the broader constituent base.
Thanks, Kurt. We're really glad you're on today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else we haven't heard from? Get your voice in the room. Anything else in terms of comment or recommendations for next steps? What are the key things that you want to see us move forward with? What are the gaps? This is the time to help us shape this.
I'd like to go back to Tim Garcia's comment about a cross-boundary, a true project. And I think it's really a pivotal time to do that right now, because we signed the agreement in 2018. We were really hot out of the gates with shared stewardship. We had a new governor come in that assembled his administration and his staff, and he really took ownership of this initiative, which is really important to have that leadership at the top, and has laid out some expectations on you know, his vision and how we need to try to accomplish that. As I said earlier, both the governor and the legislature have stepped it up in terms of resources and helping staff the agency for shared stewardship. But the public's looking at this too, and they want to see, okay, how is the state and the federal government, private landowners going to do this? We've been shipping around this. We've been you know, digging in at the landscape level, talking about the focal areas, and you know, we've really been trying to drive this home, both at the ground level and at the top, and really trying to find the place where we can meet in the middle and actually demonstrate a true project on the ground. So I'm all in for that, Tim. I just wanted to follow up with you on that, because it's time to really showcase this and show what we can try to get done here in terms of a true landscape project on the ground. We've got the resources, I believe, to get that done. And so I think that needs to really be a priority, is to lay out what that's going to look like, how we're going to get it done, where it's going to happen on either landscape, and put our efforts into that, and demonstrating to the governor, the legislature, the public, that this is the direction we're going and this is going to work.
This is Craig, and I guess I'm very hopeful, I'm very optimistic that that's what we're already, you know, this is really the year of planning. And a lot of what Jeff outlined and what Lynn outlined is the planning process that we've been going through. It all ties up under the Forest Action Plan. All of the landscapes that were identified are within our priority areas of our Forest Action Plan. But you know, those large federal projects that they identified, Sage Hen and Scatterlands and Honey Badger, those are existing federal projects. And so what we're focusing on is how can we work on the perimeters of those, on the adjacency areas of those, on the state and the industrial and non-industrial ownerships, so that we are truly having a landscape impact. And so I think I appreciate the statement, Tim, and I think it's a challenge, you know, for us when we meet again and as we talk about what's going on, that we're trying to tie that story up so that people aren't having to wonder, that it's very obvious that's what we're trying to do, and here's how we're moving there, and here's what it's going to take to get there. So I think that's a good challenge to us in terms of how we talk about this, that becomes clear.
So this, Dave, I'd just like to add in on this a little bit. You know, these meetings that are important. You know, it's great the governor set up this advisory group so we could have these broad-based discussions. I know I learned something that I didn't know before, as I'm not as close to it as our forest supervisors are. But, you know, maybe we could utilize, we have the shared stewardship coordinators that are work for both IDL and the Forest Service. Maybe we could use them as part of this group to give them some direction to look for those opportunities above just the routine, more the routine, keeping things going, but look for those opportunities for the cross-boundary projects that really will set the stage as an example. And I'll leave it at that.
Anybody else? We have lots of great ideas. I'm really crafting sort of the action list that I will put together and sort of share back with you for what I'm hearing as themes. Who else wants to weigh in before we conclude and wrap this thing up?
So Peg, I just threw out something to everyone, some ideas on next steps. I think next meetings, how often are we going to meet? Kind of what are the goals for the year? I think the goals should drive whether we meet, how often we meet, and what we meet to talk about. So I think that's pretty critical that we have kind of an action plan or something that will then drive things. And then I think along those lines, I keep thinking one of the things we talked about early on in this cross-boundary work was how to protect communities, how to protect lands from fire. And, you know, the BLM did a big analysis. I don't know how many states it was. It could have been up to 8 or 9 states, but they looked at collectively where to put fire breaks. And I think it included southern Idaho. It didn't include anything north of the Salmon. But is there some work that could be done to identify potential for fire breaks? I know Anna's on the phone, so I don't want to speak for her, but a lot of the interest, I think, in bringing some of the landowners to the table was looking at how to protect their lands from fire. And is there an opportunity to do some kind of analysis that says, here, if we were to put fire breaks here and we could maintain those fire breaks, we could protect communities, it could protect private lands. But to me, that's something I think still would be worthwhile pursuing, something along those lines. And then the last thing I just come up with, it's kind of a governance issue, I think. You know, when we talked about, you know, metrics and accomplishments and where that resides, I really like the idea of that residing with Ava's shop. I think that is a nice place to put it. I think she would do a great job. But I think having a framework that we agree that this is what we're going to report on, this is what it looks like, and getting that together sooner than later so that whenever you want to start the clock, if we say this started on January 1, we're going to produce a report January 1 of 2021. But I think that's going to be important. And then this issue of doubling acres treated, you know, that is unique to Idaho. There's not another single shared stewardship agreement in the country that refers to doubling acres treated. And you look at our principles document, it really references the culture of Idaho, the resources that we have. And I think this issue of who owns that. So how do we collectively support? Obviously the Forest Service has a 5-year plan to get work done. How do we make sure that we're supporting the Forest Service, not in a negative way, but in a cooperative way to help them achieve that so that collectively we can achieve this goal of doubling acres treated on the national forest lands. So to me, those are some of the thoughts that I have on, you know, next steps, things we need to consider as we move forward as a group.
Good. John Roberts, go ahead.
So I think earlier we accepted 2 of the reports. We got 4 committees working here, I guess, and we had reports from all of them. We accepted 2 of them. John Robinson and I have been chatting. I think we need to make sure, it was our intent to make sure that all of the metrics we included in the metrics plan were things we already had, or things were already measurable, and perhaps things we already had. So we need to include Ara and Dennis in those conversations, I think, more specifically. So do we need to accept all 4 plans? Do we need to, the third plan is was not accepted? Where do we go with the 4 committees? I guess I'm requesting that we have a little more input on the metrics committee. What about the other ones?
The other was opportunities, sort of the big opportunities that Tom outlined was the last one. And do we need these things to simmer some more? Do people need more time to digest what they've heard today? Or can we accept as draft sort of the last two work products, the metrics as sort of operating metrics and refine later? And same with those key opportunities that Tom mentioned. What's your thinking on all that? Anyone else? Hearing nothing, crickets. Let's assume that we're going to work with these in sort of, they'll be flexible and adaptive, but we have something to go on at this point. Is that fair? Okay. We can certainly be adaptive and take comment as you think about it, but we're going to go forward with what we have as for our own guidance. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of information thrown out. Tom's report out some really big, broad ideas. Some of them, I think, implementable in the short term, some of them much longer term and more of a commitment to study how we would get at that. But it gives us some really important information to be thinking about. So, but difficult to say, yeah, full speed ahead on all of those things right now, I think, until we've had more time to process that.
Yep, we'll be adaptive. Okay, I know we're losing a few people. Let's go ahead and wrap this up. I'd like to turn it back over to Dustin or to Brian. Do you have any closing remarks, or Dave Rosenkrantz, closing remarks, and we'll conclude.
Just shift.
Just appreciate the opportunity to listen in to everybody and be a part of this group. Thanks.
Thanks, Dave.
I don't really have anything, Peg, other than I had to boot Lynn off his computer because mine shut down. No, I don't have a lot, but again, it was important to be able to re-engage with everybody today and really start gaining some momentum here, which clearly we have. It's just digging in and keeping it up. And so at all levels of this initiative, I think there's a strong commitment to make sure that we are achieving the goals and achieving the vision of the governor on this. And so I just really appreciate everybody's commitment. And in a perfect world, absent of COVID, we would be meeting face-to-face. There's so much value in the face-to-face meetings, and hopefully once we get to that step, Peg, of planning a next follow-up meeting, we'll be in a better situation with this virus to be able to meet face-to-face. So I just appreciate everybody being here today. So thank you.
Thanks, Dustin. Brian?
I echo Dustin's comments. I look forward to shaking everybody's hand, hopefully sooner than later. I think we've made strong progress. We put ourselves in a position to be even more successful. I'm really excited that we have that foundation in place, the opportunity to be able to say, as we apply for grants or otherwise, that every dollar, or the vast majority of the dollars that go into this program go on the ground. The prospect of demonstrating cross-boundary projects in the future, that's ultimately the definition of shared stewardship, and exciting. We've identified a lot of things, a lot of next steps and projects, and which brings me to my final point. What we've accomplished, and in particular this meeting, would not have been possible without the determination of Peg to keep this moving, and in particular to assist me in getting this going while there's a lot of other demands. And so Peg, all of your efforts are very much appreciated, and I'd ask everyone to maybe give Peg a little hand, whether with mute on or not, for all your hard work and all your contributions. throughout this. It's really appreciated, so thank you.
Thank you, everyone. It's been my pleasure to work for and with you all, and with and for the governor's office. And we have great leadership, bold leadership in Idaho, and it's kind of the capstone to on my career to have served in this position. So thank you. With that, I think we're done.
Yeah, really appreciate everybody being here. We'll monitor COVID and make a decision as far as the next meeting and whether that's a live meeting or another Zoom meeting. But I think we've all adjusted to this process, and while we'd rather be in person, it's much better than not meeting at all. So thanks everybody for your participation.
Yes.
And thanks again, Peg, for everything.
Thanks everyone.
You might want to monitor rock slides too.
All right. Thanks everyone. Bye-bye.